I, 26F, need to provide some background before getting into the current situation. My mom passed away from cancer when I was 8. She was diagnosed when I was 6, and those 2 years were really hard on our family, especially my dad Greg, 50M. After she passed, my dad fell into a deep depression. He tried to stay strong for me, but I could tell he was struggling. He worked long hours at his engineering firm, and my grandmother, Mom's mom, helped raise me during those difficult years. 4 years after Mom's death, my dad met Sarah, 45F, at a grief support group. She told him she was a widow with a teenage daughter Amy, now 28F. My dad was immediately drawn to her because she seemed to understand his pain. They dated for about 6 months before getting married. Looking back, everything happened really fast, but at the time, I was just happy to see my dad smiling again. Sarah and Amy moved into our house, and at first, everything seemed perfect. Sarah was attentive and kind, always making sure to include me in activities. But slowly, things started to change. It was subtle at first. Sarah would plan shopping trips with just Amy, or she'd help Amy with her homework while telling me to figure things out on my own because I was smarter and didn't need help. When I tried to talk to my dad about feeling left out, Sarah would always be there to explain how I was just having trouble adjusting and needed time. The real problems started when I was 16. Sarah began suggesting that my dad should put our house in both their names. This was the house my mom and dad had bought together, the one where all my childhood memories with Mom were made. My mom had worked 2 jobs to help with the down payment, and it meant a lot to me. When I overheard them discussing it, I tried to object, but Sarah turned on the waterworks. She said she felt like an outsider in her own home and that my dad didn't trust her. My dad, not wanting to upset his new wife, agreed to add her name to the deed. Around this time, Sarah's treatment of me got worse. She would forget to wash my laundry but always had Amy's clothes clean and folded. She would make my favorite meals but deliberately add ingredients I was allergic to, then act apologetic when I couldn't eat them. The worst part was how she would do all this when my dad wasn't around, and then act completely different when he was home. Amy and I never really got along, but we maintained a civil relationship. She was always distant, almost like she was hiding something. Now I understand why. Looking back, there were times when she seemed uncomfortable with her mom's behavior, but she never said anything. 2 years ago, my grandmother passed away. She had always been worried about me after my mom died, especially after seeing how Sarah treated me when she visited. She left me a significant inheritance, including my mom's jewelry collection and some family heirlooms that had been passed down for generations. The inheritance also included a substantial amount of money that my grandmother had saved specifically for me. This is when Sarah showed her true colors. She started talking about how families should share everything. She would make comments about how Amy was struggling to pay for graduate school while I had all this extra money. She even tried to convince my dad that as my parent, he had some right to help manage the inheritance. When I refused to share anything, she started crying to my dad about how I was being selfish and turning into a spoiled, entitled person. Last month, I was helping my dad organize his home office. Sarah never lets him organize anything, claiming she has a system. While sorting through old paperwork, I found a box of documents hidden behind some books. Inside were credit card statements, collection notices, and legal documents showing that Sarah had been in massive debt when she married my dad. We're talking about hundreds of thousands of dollars in credit card debt, unpaid loans, and even some gambling debts. But that wasn't the worst part. I found emails between Sarah and Amy from before the marriage, discussing their plan. Sarah had specifically joined a grief support group to find a wealthy widower. They had researched my dad, figured out his net worth, and planned how to get him to marry her quickly before he could discover her financial problems. There were even emails about how to convince him to add her to the house deed and joint accounts. When I confronted Sarah with these documents, she didn't even try to deny it. Instead, she broke down crying, claiming she had been desperate and afraid when she met my dad, but had genuinely fallen in love with him later. She begged me not to tell him, saying it would destroy their marriage and our family. I gave her 24 hours to tell my dad herself, or I would. She must have spun some story to him because when I tried to show him the evidence, he refused to even look at it. He said Sarah had already told him about some financial troubles from her past, and that everyone deserves a second chance. He accused me of trying to cause problems because I was jealous of his relationship with Sarah. I was furious. This woman had deliberately targeted my grieving father, lied about being a widow. I later discovered her first husband was very much alive, hidden massive debts, and manipulated her way into our lives. She had spent years subtly pushing me away from my dad, and now she had him so wrapped around her finger that he couldn't even see the truth. I packed my bags that day and moved in with a friend. My dad keeps calling and leaving messages about how I'm being unreasonable and tearing the family apart. Sarah has been posting on social media about how heartbreaking it is when children let money and jealousy destroy their family relationships. My mom's side of the family supports me, but my dad's relatives keep saying I need to forgive and forget for the sake of family harmony. But I can't forget. This woman targeted my vulnerable father, lied her way into our lives, tried to push me out, and now wants to get her hands on my inheritance. Ida for refusing to have anything to do with them and protecting my inheritance through legal means? Update 1: the past 2 weeks have been absolute chaos. After I moved out, Sarah started calling all our family friends and relatives, telling them I had a mental breakdown because of unresolved grief over my mom's death. At first, I ignored it because I didn't want to engage in her drama, but then something unexpected happened. Amy showed up at my workplace 3 days ago. I almost didn't recognize her because she looked terrible, like she hadn't slept in days. She asked if we could talk somewhere private. I was hesitant, but something about her demeanor made me agree. We went to a nearby coffee shop, and what she told me turned my whole world upside down. Apparently, Sarah had done this exact same thing before, multiple times. The story about being a widow? Complete lie. Amy's real dad is alive and well, living in California. He wasn't some deadbeat who abandoned them like Sarah had told everyone. He was actually a successful businessman who Sarah had targeted, just like my dad. She had married him, convinced him to put assets in her name, maxed out credit cards in his name, and then divorced him when she found my dad, someone she considered a better prospect. Amy showed me documents from her mom's previous marriage and divorce. She had photos, emails, and court documents proving everything. She even showed me a notebook where Sarah had written detailed plans about how to manipulate different men she was targeting. My dad wasn't even her first choice. She had been working on another widower from the grief support group, but he got suspicious and started asking too many questions. The reason Amy came forward now is that history is repeating itself. She found recent emails showing that Sarah is already planning her exit strategy from my dad. She's been in contact with another wealthy man she met at some charity event. But she won't leave until she gets her hands on more assets. Specifically, she's been obsessing over my inheritance. Amy confessed that Sarah has a gambling addiction that she's managed to hide for years. She's been losing massive amounts of money on online poker and sports betting. That's why she's been so desperate to get me to share my inheritance with Amy. She needed the money to cover her gambling debts before my dad discovered them. Amy showed me screenshots of Sarah's gambling accounts. She's lost over $200,000 in the past year alone. What made me feel physically sick was learning that Sarah has been monitoring my bank accounts. Apparently, she installed some tracking software on my dad's computer and has been using his passwords to check my accounts. She even tried to call my bank pretending to be me to get information about my inheritance, but thankfully they had proper security measures. I took all this information to my dad, thinking surely now he would see the truth. His reaction felt like a punch to the gut. He accused me of bribing or manipulating Amy into lying about her mother. He said I was acting just like my mom. Apparently, Sarah had told him that my mom had tried to turn him against her family when they were first dating. This was a complete lie, but Sarah had spent years planting these seeds of doubt in his mind. My dad's behavior has become increasingly erratic. He showed up at my friend's apartment where I'm staying, demanding I stop spreading lies about his wife. He said I was acting like a spoiled child who couldn't handle not being the center of attention anymore. When I tried to show him the evidence Amy had given me, he refused to even look at it. Instead, he threatened to go to court to try to get control of my inheritance to protect me from making bad decisions. Sarah has been playing the victim masterfully. She's been telling everyone that Amy is mentally unstable and has always been jealous of her relationship with me. She's claiming that Amy is making up lies because she's angry that Sarah won't give her more money. Some family friends have started avoiding me because Sarah told them I was harassing her and threatening to destroy her marriage. The most disturbing part is that Amy found draft emails where Sarah was planning to hire someone to accidentally run into me and get close to me. She wanted to plant someone in my life who could influence my financial decisions and help her get access to my inheritance. When Amy confronted her about this, Sarah laughed it off as a joke, but Amy took screenshots just in case. I've hired a lawyer to protect myself and my assets. The lawyer advised me to file for a restraining order against Sarah after seeing the evidence of her planning to have someone infiltrate my life. We're also looking into her previous financial frauds to see if there's enough evidence for criminal charges. Amy is terrified of her mother finding out that she told me everything. She's planning to move across the country to live with her real dad. She apologized for not telling me the truth sooner and for participating in Sarah's schemes when they first met my dad. She was only 18 then and was afraid of being cut off financially if she didn't go along with her mother's plans. The hardest part of all this is watching my dad destroy himself for this woman. The strong, loving father who raised me seems to have disappeared, replaced by someone I barely recognize. Some of his colleagues have reached out to tell me he's been making mistakes at work and seems distracted all the time. I'm worried about him, but every attempt I make to help him is twisted by Sarah into proof that I'm trying to destroy their marriage. Right now, I'm focusing on protecting myself legally and emotionally. I've started seeing a counselor to help deal with everything, and I'm grateful for the support of my mom's family. But I won't lie, watching my dad choose his manipulative wife over his own daughter hurts more than I can express. Update 2: Just when I thought this situation couldn't get more twisted, everything exploded in ways I never imagined. Last week, I received a message on LinkedIn from a woman named Rachel, 32F. She introduced herself as Sarah's first husband's daughter and said she had been trying to find me for weeks after hearing about our situation through mutual acquaintances. Rachel's story was chillingly similar to mine. 10 years ago, her dad had also been a grieving widower when Sarah joined his grief support group. Sarah had used the same tactics, rushing into marriage, isolating him from his children, and gradually taking control of his finances. Rachel had also found herself being subtly pushed out of her family home while Sarah favored Amy. She sent me court documents and police reports that showed an even darker side of Sarah. Apparently, when Rachel had tried to warn her dad about Sarah's gambling, Sarah had staged a break-in at their house and blamed Rachel. She even planted evidence to make it look like Rachel had stolen money to support a drug habit. Rachel's dad believed Sarah and cut contact with Rachel for 3 years. By the time he discovered the truth, Sarah had already divorced him and moved on to her next target. Rachel connected me with 2 other families who had similar experiences with Sarah. In each case, she had targeted wealthy widowers with teenage daughters. She would always claim to be a widow herself, use Amy to help her seem more sympathetic, and then systematically work to gain control of their assets. She had perfected her manipulation techniques over the years, learning from each situation what worked best. The most disturbing discovery was that Sarah kept detailed records of everything. Rachel's dad had found notebooks where Sarah had written elaborate plans, including how to exploit each family's specific vulnerabilities. She had even categorized potential targets based on their net worth and how easily she thought they could be manipulated. When I shared this information with my uncle, Dad's brother, he finally took me seriously. He had always been skeptical of Sarah but had kept quiet to keep peace in the family. He helped me compile all the evidence and presented it to my dad when Sarah was away at what she claimed was a wellness retreat, which we later discovered was actually a gambling trip to Las Vegas. For the first time, my dad actually looked at the evidence. The notebooks were what finally broke through his denial. He recognized Sarah's handwriting in entries that detailed plans to manipulate him, including notes about using his grief over Mom's death to rush him into marriage. There were even calculations of how much money she could potentially get from divorcing him once she had enough assets in her name. My dad started doing his own investigation and discovered things even I hadn't known about. Sarah had opened multiple credit cards in his name and maxed them out gambling. She had been stealing money from their joint accounts and hiding it in a separate account under her maiden name. She had even been planning to refinance their house without his knowledge, using forged documents. When Sarah returned from her retreat, my dad confronted her with everything. Instead of denying it, she tried to blackmail him. She threatened to tell his business partners about some supposedly illegal deals he had made, all lies, but she said she had forged documents to support her claims. She also threatened to ruin his reputation by accusing him of abuse. But Sarah didn't know that we had anticipated this. My dad had already spoken to his business partners and warned them about potential false allegations. We had also gathered statements from her previous victims and evidence of her past frauds. When she realized she was cornered, she completely changed tactics. She broke down crying, claiming she had a gambling addiction and needed help. She begged my dad to give her another chance, saying she would go to rehab and make everything right. When that didn't work, she became furious and started threatening everyone. She told my dad she would make sure he lost everything in the divorce, including the house my mom had helped buy. My dad finally filed for divorce, but Sarah isn't going quietly. She's already hired an aggressive divorce attorney and is demanding half of everything, including my dad's retirement accounts. She's also trying to claim that she helped raise me, so she deserves some say in my inheritance. Thankfully, my lawyer says her claims about my inheritance have no legal standing, but we're still documenting everything in case she tries something else. The most surprising development is that Amy has agreed to testify about her mother's schemes if the case goes to court. She's finally standing up to her mom, even though Sarah has threatened to disown her. Amy said she's tired of being used as a pawn in her mother's cons and wants to make things right. Update 3: The divorce proceedings between my dad and Sarah have turned into a complete nightmare. True to her threats, Sarah has been doing everything possible to make our lives miserable. She started by creating multiple social media accounts where she posted private family photos and information, along with lengthy posts about how my dad and I supposedly abused and mistreated her and Amy for years. She even went as far as posting edited screenshots of conversations and old photos of bruises she got from a car accident years ago, trying to paint my dad as abusive. Thankfully, we had the original photos and medical records from the accident, which our lawyer used to prove she was lying. Several of Sarah's previous victims also came forward with evidence of her using similar tactics in their cases. The turning point came when Sarah's gambling debts caught up with her. 2 loan sharks showed up at our house looking for her. Apparently, she had borrowed huge amounts of money using my dad's business as collateral, forging his signature on the documents. This led to a police investigation, and they found evidence of multiple instances of fraud and forgery going back years. Faced with potential criminal charges, Sarah finally agreed to a settlement. She got less than she wanted, basically just enough money to pay off her gambling debts, but she still managed to delay the proceedings long enough to drain a significant amount of my dad's savings on legal fees. She and Amy moved to Arizona last week, and we heard through mutual acquaintances that she's already attending grief support groups there. My dad has been trying to rebuild his life, but the damage Sarah caused is extensive. He had to remortgage his business to cover the debts she accumulated in his name. He's lost friends who still believe some of Sarah's lies, and his reputation in our community has taken a hit. He's in therapy now, finally dealing with not just Sarah's betrayal but also his unresolved grief over my mom's death, which Sarah had exploited so effectively. He keeps asking me to move back home, saying he needs help getting his life back on track. He's apologized multiple times for not believing me and for choosing Sarah over me. While I appreciate his apologies, I told him I need time. The trust between us has been severely damaged, and I can't just pretend the last few years never happened. Rachel and the other victims have formed a support group, and we've been sharing information to help warn others about Sarah's schemes. We've also been working with a detective who believes Sarah has done this to at least 6 other families across 3 states. The investigation is ongoing, but there's a possibility she might face criminal charges if enough evidence is found. Amy reached out last week to let me know she's cut all contact with her mother and is living with her real dad now. She's finally getting therapy to deal with years of being manipulated and used in her mother's cons. She asked for my forgiveness, but honestly, I'm not ready to forgive anyone involved in this mess. I'm focusing on my career and building my own life now. The whole experience has taught me valuable lessons about trust and family. Sometimes the people who are supposed to protect you are the ones who hurt you the most. I'm not sure if I'll ever fully reconcile with my dad, but for now, I'm at peace with keeping my distance while he works on himself. The detective warned us that Sarah will likely continue her schemes elsewhere. It's all she knows how to do. But at least our family is free of her manipulation, and we have legal protections in place if she ever tries to contact us again. Sometimes the best thing you can do is walk away and let toxic people destroy themselves.